Welcome to Straight Up Reviews, where there's no bullshit beyond the sign. As stated in my seer, I'm a big fan of Stephen King. So when I heard they were remaking Carrie yet again, I was kinda thrilled. I'll admit, like most people, I was hesitant at first, mostly due to the fact that they already remade the movie once before, as well as the fact that many people believe that no one tops Brian De Palma. However, after watching the movie, I question why everyone hates it so much. They did a fairly decent job. I call spoilers even though many people already know the story by now. For those who don't know, Carrie was based off a novel by Stephen King. And while he's done stories before that, this was his first published work. It revolves around a socially awkward teenage girl named Carrie White, who is bullied by her peers at school and abused by a religious fanatic of a mother. After experiencing the first step towards puberty, she's understandably scared. The bullies, led by Chris Hargensen, are no help either, as they pelt her with feminine products. The abuse doesn't end there. Upon returning home, her mother Margaret White catches wind of her experience, and rather than help her through it, she beats her and locks her in her closet. In the height of her recent psychological trauma, Carrie discovers she is telekinetic and telepathic. Meanwhile, one of the bullies, Sue Snell, regretting her part in the role, decides to give up her chance of the upcoming prom and convinces her boyfriend, Tommy Ross, to take Carrie instead. Tommy asks Carrie, who rejects him at first, fearing another prank, but accepts nonetheless. Chris, who isn't remorseful as Sue, skips her detention, resulting in herself getting kicked out of the prom. Believing it to be Carrie's fault, she and her crew, along with boyfriend Billy Nolan, hatch the ultimate prank by rigging the prom ballots to nominate Carrie and Tommy as prom king and queen, and dumping a bucket of pig's blood on the unsuspecting couple. As Carrie learns to control her power, she becomes more self-confident, even standing up to her own mother, whom she feared greatly. It all falls into place when the prank is pulled. Carrie finally snaps and uses her powers to full potential, destroying the school and killing those that stood in her way, before facing her mother one final time. Much of the 2013 version rehashed the De Palma version, but added scenes that were actually part of the novel, such as the opening with a graphic birth of Carrie, Margaret resorting to self-mutilation, and Sue Snell's pregnancy. It even ups the ante by adding scenes that De Palma wanted but couldn't due to budget restrictions back then, as well as subtle shoutouts to other movies involving telekinesis. For example, Carrie pretty much Vader chokes Miss Desjardins. Anyone who knew the story behind the Star Wars and Carrie's auditions in the 70s would get a kick out of that. Now, there are a lot of complaints surrounding this movie, most of it stemming from the natural hatred of remakes. People, if all remakes were evil, then you wouldn't like Cape Fear, Scarface, or John Carpenter's The Thing. All were great movies, all were vindicated by history, and all were remakes of much older movies stemming from the 1930s to the 1960s. The other big complaint is that the movie was considered unnecessary, as the De Palma version was pure gold. Even King himself stated that he liked the De Palma's adaptation better than his own book, and this was the guy that remade The Shining because he was ashamed of the Kubrick version. However, let's get down to brass tacks. It is very rare that the modern audience would show interest in anything nostalgic from books to movies. I believe that all mediums, good and bad, serve to help the audience show interest in the things that their older relatives held such high regard of. It is very rare, unless you have Netflix or On Demand, that any recent generation would watch, let alone appreciate, the original movie. The newer imaginings give them at least some knowledge and interest of the older works, to ask questions about them. The more questions, the more interest they are of them. In a way, these remakes lead them to the original. The other biggest complaint was that they were taking it too seriously. I don't blame them on that one, because the original De Palma one was made in the 70s. While there are serious tones, there's also a level of camp and over-the-top acting that brings sort of a dark sense of humor that King later associated himself in future works. The role of Margaret White had big shoes to fill, even when an actor as good as Julianne Moore takes her on. No one can top Piper Laurie's hammy performance, but that didn't stop Moore. Instead, she took on a different approach. Where Laurie's take on the role was essentially a complete psychopath using religion as a shield to forgive her misdeeds, Moore portrayed her as a crusader whose enemies are invisible to everybody but her, including the socially invisible Carrie. There's also Patricia Clarkson in the 2002 remake. She only has one mood, which I like to call Tranquil Fury. She never raises her voice even when scolding Carrie. It's intimidating but not all scary. Sorry, Clarkson, I liked you better in the Green Mile. Desjardins had many different approaches herself, from Betty Barclay's tough-as-nails coach, to Rena Sofer's straw but sympathetic sister figure, to Judy Greer's surrogate mom figure. However, all have one thing in common. They were the only ones that were ever nice for the sake of being nice, even stepping over their boundaries as teachers to get justice done for Carrie. Sue Snell, while an important character, I gotta say, doesn't have much depth other than I did bad, must make amends. Any actress can pull that one off. Sorry, Irving McClure-Wild. It's not you, it's the character. You did good, though. Chris Hargensen, on the other hand, wasn't that bland. She was pretty much the definition of evil. Manipulative, sadistic, has no empathy for the things she does, and acts always justified in it all. Those similarities stop with all three actresses. However, there's a split between. With Nancy Allen, you got the typical spoiled rich girl who believes she runs everything. With Emily DeRavin, you have the equivalent of Lex Luthor's daughter. However, she gets bonus points for planting a seed of doubt on Carrie of Sue and Tommy's plan. It goes nowhere, but it ups the evil ante. Then there's Portia Doubleday, who I like to nickname the mental pressure point girl for her being able to commit precision evil acts on victims most vulnerable, such as the YouTube incident with Carrie. She's even great at acting so genuinely like she didn't do anything wrong, as if she actually believed it. Then we have Billy Nolan. Where to begin? With Travolta, you pretty much have the typical teenage prankster who takes everything for a laugh, only showing his darker side when he slaps Chris and kills pigs. However, he's mild compared to Chris. With Jesse Codette, he has the dark side that Travolta hides turned up to 11, as if he's some kind of machine that can't be stopped, but can only be aimed. Then we have Alex Russell. He seems to have mixed the two up, but in a way that makes you think he's psychotic. In some of the most serious scenes, such as the pig kill scene, he snarks and jokes all around, even cheering Chris on when she cuts the pig for blood. He shows a much darker side when he threatens to kill Chris for thinking she's going to fink on him on the prank. Tommy Ross is rather a mixed bag. All actors portrayed him as the all-around nice guy with a bad reputation, while some vary from one actor to another. William Katt's pretty much the greatest American hero without his costume. One wonders if the guy survived the bucket falling and went into hiding as a teacher under a different name. He carries the torch because it doesn't take much for him to agree to the plan to help Carrie, whereas the other two express some reluctance. Tobias Meller was good at making him the audience surrogate on top of the typical nice guy. He acts so naturally curious on what makes Carrie tick, rather than just being there for a favor to his girlfriend. In a way, he's like us. Ansel Elgort, on the other hand, has a different approach. Much like Meller, he was reluctant at first, however he warms up to Carrie and tries his best to make her feel welcome in his social circle. He is also the most vocal during the prank, only taking the falling bucket to shut him up. Last but not least, there's Carrie herself. This was a tough one to do because I like all three performances. Sissy Spacek was phenomenal in both personality and appearance. She goes through the lengths to make herself unattractive to others, no makeup, greasing her hair to make it look frigid. Whilst her persona, the best way to describe it would be her sanity hanging on by a thread constantly, and when she talks to others, the tone suggests that, while many are abusive to her, she goes to the lengths to drive them away, vice versa, like she might hurt them back one day. Angela Bettis, on the other hand, acts like a pet that's been abused and neglected so many times that the final strike would cause her to go in a rabid-like state and bite anyone within range. Chloe Grace Moretz takes some of the cues from Sissy, but adds her own spin on the matter. For example, during the pig blood scene, Sissy and Angela often go to a trance-like state, giving the viewer the impression that she's not all there or aware of her actions, whilst Moretz takes it all in a different turn. Her rage and anger and sadness rolled into one are expressed outwards. She screams when her rage breaks, and when she goes to work on the people in her way, she has a look on her face that can only be described as total malice. I myself have read the book, and this portrayal is by far the closest ever to it. And like any other person after a normal rage bender, when she finally calms, she feels alone, scared, remorseful, and desperate. While I like all three, bonus points go to Moretz. The effects are an improvement compared to the first two adaptations. mixing practical and CG with a blend where you can never really tell. The destruction in Nolan's car earns such praise. There's only one way to describe it. If there was ever someone who wanted to do a live-action version of Akira, regardless if the adaptation becomes gold or crap, they should hire these guys. All in all, the 23 adaptation of Carrie is not a great movie, but it sure as hell deserves a lot more than 49% on the tomato meter. As usual, debate, argue, and let me know what I missed. Stay tuned for more. Chris Hargitson, Billy Nolan, Chris Nolan. I think King predicted the Dark Knight saga.